Hello, everybody. As we get started, I just want to first of all say a big shout out to Jeremy and thank you to Social Impact World for helping put on such an incredible presentation. When we originally spoke about this was a subject that I have a lot of experience but immediately I was saying I need to bring in two also all stars in the space. So I want to welcome both Michelle and Brett. We'll get into some specific bios later, but as we get started, as you're trickling in here, I know everyone has a very busy day. Wednesday is the middle of the week. We're over the hump, I think, for some. But as we get started, I want you to just drop in the chat as we begin your name and title, maybe where you're calling from or you're joining from location-wise. And what do you hope to learn? And so as we begin and kick off, we'll try to cater this to everyone and what we're working towards today and hopefully give you guys some insight as we progress here. So my name is Ricky Marton. I'm the co-founder and CEO here at Koru. I'm joined by a long friend and colleague of mine, Michelle Reisinger. She's the founder and principal of Rising Solution, and also joined by Brett Dioguradi, the Chief Operating Officer here at Summit Coffee. So thanks again for taking the time today, and we're really excited to get into things here as we progress. So the first thing I'd like to do is just get some key terms out of the way. I know this industry is riddled with semantic differentiations, different ways to look at, what things mean, and this is by no means an exhaustive list and definition of these, but for the purpose of this presentation, we'll use some of these terms, and this is how we wanted to put forth this concept into the presentations here. So ESG, the large one that we've all heard a bunch, environmental, social, and governance. This is a criteria for evaluating a company's impact on the environment, their social responsibility, and the governance practices. CSR, another large one here, corporate social responsibility. So this is a specific business model that we'll reference in which companies integrate both social and environmental concerns into their operations. Sustainability, another key one, meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Another underlying topic that we'll discuss. Social enterprise, how this all wraps together. A business that prioritizes social and environmental goals alongside financial returns. And the final one here is the triple bottom line. So this is an important framework that we all deal with that includes social, environmental, and financial performance measures. And so as we progress, we'll go into introductions here, but as Jeremy mentioned, I see some introductions already coming to the chat. Feel free to make it interactive and engaging. And as I mentioned before, feel free to drop any questions and answers and we'll have some time for it or address it right on the fly if it's applicable. So without further ado, Michelle, I will hand the mic over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ricky. It's such a pleasure to be here with everyone today. I'm coming to you from Washington, D.C. As Ricky mentioned, my name is Michelle Reisinger, and I have been in the social sector for over 20 years now. I started my career in the international humanitarian space, primarily overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan with the Red Cross. And then I transitioned after about a decade in that work into an international development nonprofit where I served as their director of innovation and design thinking. And then about 4 years ago, I opened Rising Solutions. We are a small women-owned, women-powered innovation strategy firm in Washington, D.C. We focus on innovation strategy, design thinking, and facilitation. So super happy to be here today, Ricky.
Excellent. Thanks, Michelle. And maybe a fun question to kick us off. What
Absolutely.
inspired you to focus on innovation and social impact in your career?
Oh, I love it. Thank you, Ricky. So what inspired you to focus on innovation and social impact? So we were fortunate enough to be featured in a medium.com article in December about purpose-driven business. And I had a chance in that article to actually reflect on why I chose the career I did and why the intersection between purpose and profit is important to me. And interestingly, after reflecting on it, what I realized was that I was raised with a very strong service value. So my father was the president of a university. My mother worked in the cardiac cath lab at a hospital. And my entire family has been instilled with the idea that money is not the highest form of value, and that impact and service are not just equal to, but potentially even greater than profit. And what I realized over the years is that the career that I've chosen is actually coming from that deeply instilled service value. And you'll hear me talk a lot about values on our webinar today, because I truly think that values is at the heart of very successful purpose-driven businesses. Thanks, Ricky.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks, Michelle. And I will pass the mic over to you, Brett.
Yeah, hey everybody. Thanks for joining, and happy to be here. So, my name is Brett Dioguradi, and I am based out of Davidson, North Carolina, which is just north of Charlotte. And I am the Chief Operating Officer at Summit Coffee. So I've been with Summit for a little over 3 years now, and have worked my way into the Summit team in a number of roles, and I'll get a little bit more into detail throughout this presentation, be it sustainability and impact and supply chain, and now ultimately through the operational lens. And Summit is a coffee roaster and retailer. So we have 14 cafes open now throughout the Southeast, but we also have run and manage our own roasting business, an ice cream business, and a bakery. So Summit has been around for a little over 25 years and had done a lot of really good things from its inception. Think small town, Main Street, college campus coffee shop, starting to grow throughout the region, and from city into North Carolina and then into other states. And so I joined about 3 years ago just to put some foundation, some structure, some strategy into sustainability or impact, or, we'll get into, talking a little bit more about the definitions. And why that's good for us from a business standpoint. And prior to my role at Summit, not quite 20 years in the space, but about 17 or 18 years in the greater sustainability space at large, be it at Tom's Shoes, Chipotle, Mexican Grill, a mix of startups, environmental nonprofits, education space. So I'd like to think of myself as a generalist in the best possible way. And I think that served me well. I think that's important in, the myriad issues that you deal with in the sustainability or social impact space.
Perfect. Thanks for joining, Brett. And a fun little question to kick us off for you. What drives your passion for integrating sustainability into business operations?
Yeah, well, so I think a couple of things. So if I look at the word passion, I mean, I grew up in Florida, grew up in South Florida, was outside all the time. I'm looking in the chat here. I'm not sure if we've got any folks from Florida, but tons of really unique ecosystems and places to play and be part of the world around you, be it the beach and the intercoastal and the Everglades and the Florida Keys and the rivers, and getting up to North Florida, which is an entirely different place than South Florida. So outside all the time in athletics and nature. And going through school, I was at a liberal arts school, started to learn about, the biology focus into environmental science, into sustainability, and saying, hey, how can I utilize what I'm passionate about and do it in a good way in a business setting? And the quick story, I don't know if any of you have heard of this company called PaveGen. They're out of the Netherlands, a technology that's trapping energy from movements and incorporating that into like a fun environment in like a bars, restaurants, hospitality space. And that idea while in college kind of showed me that there's a way to be unique, to be fun, to be impactful, and do it in a business forward sense, right? And so that's where I've been focusing my 17, 18 years in the workforce. And if I'm going to take everything I've learned throughout my professional career, it's, Michelle was talking about values, extremely important. I think what I tell people first is grounding everything in data to be really, really strategic, right? So data, strategy, communication, and that is what is the implementation. And so I look at that, and from a business standpoint, it's fun, it's challenging, it's important. And putting that all together is how I, think of my work and what I get to do.
Excellent. Thanks, Brett. And to kind of wrap us up here on myself, my name is Ricky Marton. I'm based in Phoenix, Arizona. I've been in the social enterprise space pretty much my entire career. Went corporate litigation service right out of college. And like every millennial, I was like, I need to do something that makes a difference in the world. So dove headfirst into the social entrepreneurship world, worked with a variety of different companies, and started to get involved with a larger scale impact and this interest to scale on an international level. So that inspired me to go back to school, where I got a master's at CU Boulder, go Buffs, out in Colorado, as well as continued out in Arizona to do my PhD, looking really at the intersection of technology, social impact, corporate sustainability, and how to pull that all together and put on that disruptive innovator mindset to kind of challenge the status quo and ask the questions that some leaders are kind of facing this struggle. It's like, how do we incorporate social impact or sustainability while still focusing on the bottom line? And so that experience, my research, culminates all together in founding and running Koru, which is essentially a technology to help do just that. And so I've had the pleasure and privilege of working with both Michelle and Brett over the years, but I've really been grounded in the idea that social impact and sustainability is not on a different wavelength than impact and ROI and business profitability, but more so they're going the same direction, and they can actually build off one another and help make businesses more profitable at the end of the day. And that's kind of what we're here today, putting this group in front of you. So my fun little question to get us going as well: what is the key factor for businesses in aligning profitability with social good? And this one right here is something that I talk about pretty much on a daily basis. Everyone's always asking, whether it's a leadership at a large company to a small mom and pop who's running and has 12 different hats on. How do I find alignment with these two somewhat conflicting areas, where a business in itself, if you think about it, the fiduciary responsibility is to maximize the value of the company, whereas social impact or sustainability can sometimes see as taken away from that. And so the key word in this question, I believe, is alignment. Every business has its unique assets and resources, whether they're a manufacturing plant, they have physical machinery, they have large warehouses, to a remote first internet company, they have technology and they have capabilities to share. And I think what you need to do from a business perspective is look at who you are, what position you operate in, what resources you have at your disposal, and also things about your business at large. What industry do you operate in, or sub-industry, geographically, where are you located, and a couple other variety of factors all come into place here. And really finding that alignment piece, because when you put those efforts into ensuring that your efforts in the social impact or the sustainability space are deeply aligned with the foundation of your business and corely integrated, that's when these initiatives actually thrive and benefit the business at large. So we'll get more into that later, but I think enough from an introduction standpoint. Let's hop into some real world scenarios. I'm seeing everyone from the nonprofit sector to B Corps, ranging from all over the place, coming here in the chat, which is incredible to have you all here today. And I want to share some real case examples from something that myself, Brett, and Michelle have all dealt with in the real world. So Brett, I'll pass it over to you for this one to kick us off.
Sure. So I'm excited to share just a quick story here. And I do want to set context a little bit about Chipotle Mexican Grill. I'm guessing that most folks here know of that business. Founded on really strong food sustainability, a really, really strong people culture, a great foundation. And then the work that I did as part of a 2-person sustainability team with an environmental focus was almost fourth tier. And not necessarily in a bad way, but that is what Chipotle was founded on. And so kind of those buckets and the order of operations. And so that meant that our team had to be really, really nimble, really, really curious, really, really ROI driven. And essentially, if a project that I brought or that we brought to the table didn't have a 2.5-year payback period in our sustainability initiatives moving forward, we didn't get approval to move forward with it. Basically, what Chipotle would say is, we will take that money and just open another location that will pay for itself in 2.5 years, right? So it was a really good learning opportunity for me in the 5 years that I was with Chipotle to be really, really strategic, curious, nimble. And one example is this waste sensor project. So Chipotle set a goal of 50% waste aversion. And if you recall from a few minutes ago, I'm grounding my entire professional career in data strategy communication. So we have this goal, which is really important, which kind of was the foundation for the first ever sustainability report that Chipotle put out and is now putting out yearly reports. But we needed to make sure that our data was actually accurate so that we could achieve this goal. And how are we going to get there strategically, and how are we going to communicate that effectively? So we'd had a longstanding partnership, which is a tip for those of you out there. I'm sure your resources are slim to none. So we were partnered with University of Denver for a number of projects. And, our 2-person team had more work than we can handle. So we relied on really smart college kids that wanted to do some real work for us. And out of this partnership, whether it was speaking or utilizing them for class projects, finding interns, DU had this little kind of startup accelerator program. And we got wind of a company that was building essentially hockey puck size sensors to go in dumpsters. And I'm not sure of the technology. I think of like infrared laser beams tracking the dumpsters. But what it would do is give us fill rates for when our dumpsters were tipped. And so in the waste space, there's an average assumption of an 80% fill rate. So I'm not going to get too into the weeds, but you can imagine it was a math problem, right? We know we have an 8-yard dumpster. It's being tipped 4 times a week. That's 32 yards. We now have total data, but is that data accurate? So by partnering throughout Denver, where we had about 25 restaurants, putting these hockey pucks, if you will, in there, what we realized was a number of really cool things. Number one, our fill rate was actually only about 56%. So we were overpaying for service that we didn't need. Some of our waste haulers were skipping days. They would know, hey, you're scheduled for 4 days. I know it's not really there. We're only going to come 3. You're probably not going to know, right? You're going to know if it's overflowing, but you might not know if it didn't get serviced. So we were able to have some nice stern chats with some of our haulers to make sure to hold them accountable. But we were able to get accurate data to set better goals, better targets, better strategy. And what we realized is we didn't need that much waste or that much dumpster space or that much landfill dumpster space. So we instituted a massive right-sizing project where we collectively throughout the country were able to more strategically understand what our waste portfolio was, how much did we need for landfill, which in some cases allowed us to have another dumpster next to it, right? 2 smaller dumpsters. We'd have a landfill. Now we can recycle in a certain location. And ultimately that led to a financial savings that I can talk more about in a moment. But super valuable project for us that checked all the boxes of being really data driven, that had really impactful results for the entire company.
Excellent. Thanks, Brett. And I'll kind of carry off on that one as well, the data driven and the results on kind of a win-win scenario here. My specific example, we were working with a packaging company, publicly traded, international, had locations all over the world. And their chief sustainability individual came to us and said, we want to be more sustainable. We hear this all the time. What does that mean? Do you want to invest in sustainable practices? Do you want to ensure internally your operations are sustainable? But they also wanted to not only have a seat at the table, so to speak, but also be a leader at the table. So we started looking at them and their business from a big picture perspective. They were a packaging company, food and beverage industry, everything from refrigeration to plastic wraps to things like that. And so we wanted to look at how we can use sustainability as a revenue driver for them and distinguish them as a leader in the sustainability space. And so right off the bat, we talked about their investment portfolios, the minority stake investment that they've taken in businesses over time. And we hashed out a strategy to, in a sense, create an in-house accelerator program. And through this, we introduced them to a number of startups, one specifically being an innovative new age startup that's using hyper efficient cooling technologies that cost less money because there's less resources, less water, less energy consumption. And we pair them together to essentially meet and work together to incorporate this new technology within this company's refrigeration line, which is all over the world. And so looking at it from this perspective, you have a large parent company who's now putting investment into a startup. The startup benefits because now they get access to a wide variety of experiences, R&D funnels, a broader public partner base. And this company now looks like a winner because they're investing in a new age startup that's in the sustainability space. They're able to incorporate in their R&D line. They published, all these R&D reports as things progress, if it goes in the right direction. And the kicker at the end of the day, this company is actually spending less money on their outgoing expenses. They're not spending as much on energy. Their water consumption goes down as well by adopting this new technology. And the fourth kicker, the win-win-win-win situation I like to hint at, the world's benefiting from this. Less water, less energy, better from a sustainability standpoint. And so this is a clear example of really looking into the unique assets of a particular business. They acknowledge the space that they're in. They wanted to move forward and improve their sustainability initiatives, but they also didn't want to just donate a large check or, apply for all these certifications, but actually want to drill down into how can we become a better business and be more sustainable at the same time. And this was a unique solution that got them there. So a really good situation overall. Michelle, I'll pass it over to you because I know the audience is reading this last line and wondering what you're going to say on this one. So over to you.
Well, unfortunately, I don't have a story about a college intern coming in and saving Sustainability Day. But Ricky may have been one of those interns that came in and saved some projects in the past with me. I also wanted to just acknowledge, Ricky, that I really enjoyed that particular story because the Rainforest Alliance is actually one of Rising Solutions consultants, clients. And we've been working with them for about 4 years. And everything that you're saying, all the questions that that client was asking, Rainforest Alliance asks every day. And maybe the only difference between them is that Rainforest Alliance is a .org. And so they have legally made the commitment that they are going to put impact and revenue on the same level. But what I really think is that everybody's asking the same questions, and the vehicles that you may or may not have chosen are determining what routes are available to you, which I think is kind of interesting. And I'll just wrap up this slide by giving not a story from Rainforest Alliance, actually, but a story from Rising Solutions, if you all will permit me. So we have been around for about 4 years now, and leading into our 2023 year, we experienced tremendous growth. And Rising Solutions is a social enterprise. We are for profit, and we also have a firm commitment to do good. We only take client projects that have a quantifiable social return. And as we went into 2023, our growth caught up with us, and we found ourselves in a little bit of a perfect storm. We hadn't adjusted our pricing fast enough to catch up with the growth. We won a huge contract, which was a game changer for us, and it also forced us to bring on more people. And then at the same time, a recession was being projected for the fall, and our pipeline dried up. And we reworked our numbers, and we were looking at being about 150K in the red on the year. And we were facing an existential question of, do we open this up beyond social impact? Do we say we will now take any work so that we meet our revenue target, we meet our financial bottom line? And the mutual values-driven conversation from the executive team was, no, we are a value-driven, impact-driven organization, and you don't stray from that. And so we had a couple of very scary months in there in which we did do a lot of cutting and adjusting and changing, and embracing that abundance mindset, which I'll maybe talk a little bit about later. We ended up finishing the year almost 100K over our sign-on target. And we adhered to our principles. We adhered to that value-driven, impact-driven framework, and we did it. And I think it's when you don't open the door for a different pathway, you don't say to yourself, oh, we could water this down, oh, we could temper this. As soon as that thought enters your head, just like a Navy SEAL in BUDS training, you quit. So keep your eye on the prize. Don't give yourself an opportunity for an out. And that's the way you find your way forward.
Incredible. Thanks, Michelle. And maybe to wrap up, just a couple quick words or benefits that these businesses experience and derive from these projects to kind of summarize. And I'll kick us off here. There was that full financial return from this movement, albeit it was a long process to do this. There was reputational benefits, so they were known as a brand that was thinking forefront, and there was internal benefits too. The employees said it's exciting to incorporate these, it's beneficial for our business and the environment at large, and so that's kind of the multi-factor that came from this. Michelle and Brett, if you have any ones that you want to add to this.
Yeah, I'll take it here. I mentioned our 2.5 year payback period. Well, this project was free to do, so right off the bat, it was a good way to engage. And yes, Chipotle has the benefit of scale. So we had about 2,400 locations at that time. And when we calculated, a restaurant that does $1,000 a day, $2,000 a day, $3,000 a day, we were able to extrapolate that data to understand what our waste needs and portfolio would be per location. By right sizing, and we right sized in stages so that we didn't overcorrect and then have overflows and pay money. But that project ended up saving about $750,000 per year from what our initial calculations had been. So it was an immediate financial savings and an ongoing financial savings, which is great in the sustainability space. And you're talking about business operations. When the project started, that wasn't necessarily the case. So our team, we got very good data. Like, that was the whole point of this, is our data accurate? How can we set, that goal was out there, that 50% goal. Maybe we went backwards. We we publicly committed to 50% and then said, where are we and how are we going to get there? So that may not be the best advice always, but that was out there. So we had to be really, really thoughtful about, now building a strategic plan. So that was I think a lot of great business benefits from that project. And then some lessons learned on how we can do that in other projects or other sectors of the business and in other parts of my career as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Brett. And maybe on to kind of a other side of this conversation was this is when there's leadership buy-in, there's support, and there's all these different things that are really working for you. But a lot of you professionals out there are probably dealing with situations more like this. There's reasons not to do it, and we'll get more into challenges later at the end here. But a couple tough questions that I hear on a regular basis, and I want to kick over to both Michelle and Brett. So perhaps Brett, can you kick us off here? Is sustainability, with some quotes around it, a marketing ploy?
Yes and no, or yes and so what, when done well and for the right reasons. Data, strategy, communication, those were the three things I said, and that's what impact and implementation means. And so that communication piece is key. I want to be working for organizations where we want to share what we're doing well, what we're not doing well, why, getting feedback. We'll talk, I think, a little bit later in this presentation about authenticity and transparency. So it could be a marketing ploy, sure. But I think nowadays between regulatory landscapes, a customer base, an employee base, an investor base that is knowledgeable for what reasons they may care or whatnot. I don't think it's as easy to fake people out. It happens, but I think it's lesser. And in fact, I read an article from about 5 or 6 days ago on sustainable brands. I can't recall the exact agencies and industries that actually reported on it, but they looked at United States companies and their social media, their reports, their websites, what they were talking about from kind of like a greenwashing standpoint, and found that only about 2% of companies in the US, at least according to this study, are greenwashing. I think it's kind of the other way. They found close to 60% are green hushing, this concept of being afraid to publicly talk about what you're doing. So they found much greater, 2% greenwashing to 60%, 58% green hushing, for fear of misstepping, for fear of pushback. A lot of the anti-woke and ESG and DEI challenges, we could say, especially over the past few years. So is sustainability a marketing ploy, right? Like, is sustainability marketing? Yes. And I think it should be done the right way when you can point back to why you're doing that, values alignment. There's a million reasons to be focusing on X, Y, and Z. So as a company, if you're grounded in what you're doing, what you're focusing and telling that story, I think it should be a tool as part of your good work.
Yeah, well said. And Michelle, before kicking off, I'll respond really quick. I actually read that same article, and it was interesting because it also talked about the benefit that these businesses have when they are actually doing it correctly. And so as you professionals out there, one of the things that you work with is convincing leadership to some degree. Like, call it as it is. It's difficult to say this is the reason, this is why, these are benefits. But at the end of the day, that 2% number is a very real number to show a lot of brands and companies are doing this well. It's the fear of not doing it well that keeps other individuals and companies for pushing forward with this work. I think that's something really important to rely on, that this is beneficial. Like, numbers are in the stocks, whether it's publicly traded or private markets, they benefit from doing this work if it's done properly. And this 60-minute session we have is hopefully an attempt to help you think about it from that perspective and ensure that you're going about this in the right way. So very good answer, Brett. I appreciate that. And I know we could spend an entire conversation on just that one here. But Michelle, I'll hand it over to you with this question, which is kind of similar related, but is it possible to achieve maximum profitability while prioritizing social good?
Yeah, I love this question, Ricky. Thank you for giving this to me. And also give me a little grace here because I'm actually going to pick apart the question. I didn't want you to change it because I think the question accurately represents the way a lot of companies think about this topic. It's zero sum. It's either or. It's a presentation of a binary situation. Either it's profit or it's social good, but clearly it can't be both at the same time. And I feel like that narrative continues to perpetuate our CSR and ESG efforts. And I think it's a narrative we should kill because I think that it is not either or, it's yes and. And I think if you're truly leading with the values that lead you to create a double or a triple bottom line, they are not binary. They are both important. And if you have achieved maximum profitability at the expense of doing social good, I would argue that's not a win. I would argue the better win is the level of profitability you reach when your social good is either equal or increased. In other words, they're not at odds with each other. They're symbiotic. They're happening mutually at the same time. And I think the phrasing of this question is really so important, Ricky, because I think this is the pervasive narrative in the environment that we're seeing right now. And so I want to offer the audience, I'm not sure if anyone out there has read Let My People Go Surfing by Yvon Chouinard. He's the founder of Patagonia. But if you're looking for a really great memoir on a purpose-driven business where along the way you can see the balance and counterbalance of profit, mission, profit, mission, profit, mission. And he does a wonderful job of laying out how they reconciled what their clothing and their products were doing at the expense of environment, and then how to catch that back up again. And then they would create profit, and then they would catch back up again. And then ultimately, he's looking for that equilibrium between those two goals, which I think really is where we should be going with this question, which is how do we achieve maximum profitability while achieving maximum social good, and so that they are hand in hand symbiotic together and not this zero sum, one at the expense of the other. And I think the continued zero sum mindset around these initiatives is where we're seeing things like whitewashing, like greenwashing, like green hushing. Brett, I hadn't heard that term, but I like it a lot. And I think that it's that presentation of the binary and the zero sum that leads us down that path.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. And I could not agree more. And I love how you said that. And I expect nothing less than to cut across, and break apart that question, because it is an important one that you hear all the time. I saw Eleanor put that link in the chat. That book in itself, I've read it multiple times through and through. I highly recommend it as well to really navigate this space. Yvon Chouinard is an incredible writer, but also a visionary in terms of being one of the original individuals who puts that together. And Michelle, as if on cue, I think you teed off this next conversation here. This is a fun one. I hope we're going to get some involvement with the audience here. I believe Jeremy, the wizard behind this whole presentation, has the ability to put a poll up there. So if you navigate to the right side of your screen, you'll see a little graph chart looking objective. It's underneath the question mark. And I want to ask you all the question, which is more important, sustainability or social impact? And while you guys are all doing that, we'll address this a little bit. Curious to see what you guys think, but I will kick this off to both Michelle and Brett. No itinerary or lines here, but just kind of open conversation. Let's have some fun.
Yeah, I'm happy to kick us off with this one, Ricky. And folks, that poll graphic is there on the right. Maybe Ricky, you can let us know when the poll results are in, and we can maybe weigh in as well on the results. But I'll just start from my perspective on this one. This makes me chuckle a little bit. Number one, it's binary again, sustainability versus social impact, and so you can see how ingrained the narrative is. But the interesting thing to me is I would actually bundle sustainability under social impact. And so I don't often work in a context in which these two are presented in binary. I actually work in a context where if you are doing sustainability, you are doing social impact. You are indicating that you care about leaving some kind of legacy, some kind of return beyond just profits. And so again, I think this is a very interesting conversation around the binary, because I would bundle sustainability under social impact, and the fact that they are broken out, and that you can have different conversations in different spaces, and these terms mean different things. I think this is perpetuation of the gray area. I think that without, you covered terms at the beginning, which was incredibly helpful because it baselines it for this conversation. But we all know there are conversations happening every day around the world in which people are interpreting this language differently. They're viewing social impact and sustainability incredibly differently than my just single view of those terms. And so it creates gray area for lack of a centralized, institutionalized baseline understanding. And then it allows for that slippery slope into, bad behavior or bad practices. And so Brett, I'm super curious to hear what you think on this one. That's just my personal take.
No, that's a great one. And, looks like we've got a few votes in. Started out with sustainability in the lead, and then you were speaking so eloquently about social impact, and now it's taken the lead. Interestingly enough, and we chatted a little bit before this call, I had never actually thought of this conversation in this direction, and in fact we didn't define social impact at the first slide. We did define sustainability. Sustainability in the context of how it came out of the Brundtland Commission, United Nations, 1987, meeting the needs today without compromising the ability for future generations to meet their needs. And that is this context of sustainable development. And how are we building? How are we evolving? How are we providing resources and using resources that are on the planet into the future, needing them today, but also leaving them for the future? So for fun, I do want to read something. I utilized ChatGPT just to ask that question to it, right? It's the AI world. And its answer, similar to what you just said, and then I'll speak, gave, in essence, sustainability is the foundation and social impact builds upon it. Sustainability ensures that resources are available to support a society, while social impact focuses on how those resources are used to improve people's lives. So I think ChatGPT would agree, essentially, Michelle, with exactly what you said. But in my professional career, and even thinking about what I do in my title, and I'll share a little bit, I do say I'm a sustainability practitioner, but I also go right to the concept of triple bottom line: people, planet, profit. So the work I have done has always included people and the social element and the communities. That being said, when I joined Summit Coffee a little over 3 years ago, I was sustainability director and with this focus on supply chain. And after about a year of kind of building these programs, these foundations of data, I changed my title to impact, because I did find that I was getting a little bit pigeonholed, and we needed to. We effectively had very little of an environmental focus at Summit as an agriculturally based, food and beverage company. So we didn't have a great environmental strategy throughout the entire value chain. And it's not that I've accomplished that. We will never accomplish it, right? It's an iterative process forever and ever. But I was doing more and wanted to highlight and focus on more around education and workforce development and pay and women's rights and DEI. And so my title changed to impact. And then as we continue to grow, it's now an operational focus, but employing those tactics all throughout. So yeah, I don't know if it's one, right? I think it's the definition. I think it's a bunch of, good people doing lots of good work, and there are different reasons as to what and why you're focusing. But through the lens of, and to be clear, I almost never actually use the word sustainability when I explain anything about what I do. I meet people where they're at. I find opportunities to do good and have it make sense for the things that they care about, be it business, be it family, be it education, whatever it is, because I think in particular that word is polarizing or confusing. So when I talk about people and planet in a business context, that starts to turn the wheels, and then I move from there as a connector. So Ricky, I don't know where you want to take it from there. So I don't know if we have an answer, right? It is a scale. It's both and.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that, Brett. And that was kind of the purpose of this. It's like in my work and all of our work, you hear these terms thrown in the mix from conversation, concern, priorities. And I think your story about Summit Coffee is really interesting because you were in impact and sustainability, excuse me, and then operations, meaning we see this as such an integral part of the business that we want to make it core to what we're doing. The issue I think comes oftentimes is, as you touched on, the polarization. You know, those words that you saw in front, the CSR, ESG, social impact, you say that to certain individuals and their eyes, you know, they give an eye roll or they say, no, good one, or, you know, like that's fluffy things that you do to promote media or make people happy, but it doesn't actually drive business. And so in a lot of our conversations, we talk about this as like, this is partnership work. This is improving your business strategy. It's becoming an innovator in the space. They're not saying let's use social impact as the key differentiator, but I think these go kind of hand in hand. And maybe I want to throw the pot a little bit more. So maybe a question back at both of you guys is if leadership sees adjacently the value in this work, this meaning the big picture of impact, purpose, that's why we're here today. But they said, hey, I want you to allocate 50% of your current time to doing this work once again. You know, you have to prioritize. You have to say, am I focusing on energy reduction, waste management, or if I'm focusing on our corporate social responsibility initiatives? How do you make that decision? And with that, you know, how do you look at prioritizing these certain items? Michelle, Brett, either one of you.
Prioritization is very fun. I think it's I'll give a couple answers here that hopefully answer the question, and if not, apologies, but I'm going to say it anyways. I like to think at Summit, at least, the approach is a bit, it's top down and bottom up at the same time throughout the entire value chain. And so one of the challenges, for example, is something like disposable cups in coffee. Depends on what data set you look at, but something into the 16 billion plus disposable cups being thrown away every single year in the US alone, and then go worldwide. That is a big number. But in reality, that cup piece of the entire environmental and social and sustainability and social impact landscape is only like about a 4 to 5% of the impact of coffee, right? So should that be the priority that I focus on in our cafes, is how to get disposable cups out of the way, when, you know, disposable cups actually also make for more business. They allow people to grab and go, and that's a huge part of coffee culture in the US. But that number is huge, and that is something that the customer literally touches, right? So like, how do I decide, is that where I should be focusing? Why or why not? When in, you know, there's massive issues around the carbon and climate and water and you know, land degradation and habitat loss that is in origin of coffee, but the customer never touches, right? So that prioritization matrix and focus is really, really difficult. And part of that has to do with the financial landscape. Part of it has to do with kind of what you're looking at from employee engagement or where your company is going, right? We're expanding into more cafes. And one of the first things that we hear from prospective investors and buyers is the sustainability story. So truthfully, they're not so concerned with was our focus last year on water or energy or waste or farmers. They appreciate the transparency and the work in sustainability at large, and have kind of trusted us sometimes a year over year to change what our focus is and why, as long as I've taken the approach to be really thoughtful about explaining what that is and allowing different aspects of our business to be involved in that. So that's my answer to a question you may or may not have answered, but hopefully that was helpful.
No, no, that's good. And once again, I think this is one that we could spend a lot more time debating. And I urge you all to reach out and continue the conversation with us. But that just reminded me of one quick thing. It's like, you know, we hear this term often, and this will sound a little weird, but like sexy sustainability worker or things from that perspective. And you talked about coffee cups. It's front and center. You know, you'll see at brands, if you bring back your mug, you can get a 25, you know, cent discount, things like that. It's front and center. But you don't see big companies saying, everybody, look, we have low flush toilets out there. Like, and that water consumption is a big one, but it's the PR piece, the branding that goes into it. And although water is a huge issue when it comes to environmental ramifications of businesses, it's things that you can actually appeal to. And so the efficacy, the prioritization is really interesting. But yeah, I appreciate those answers. And just under the interest of time, I think I'll move on to the next one here. Uh, as you all know, you have come to kind of learn some insights on profit, purpose, how to tie them to businesses. But I think one of the most important things and the key takeaways from today's session is this slide right here. And so when speaking with Michelle, Brett, and even Jeremy from Social Impact World, what is the best way to get through to the audience? It's to really lean into what they're dealing with. And all these listed here are issues or challenges that I hear about on a regular basis. I know Michelle and Brett here as well. And so we just want to do kind of a quick little rapid fire as we're approaching the final quarter of today's session on things you may hear in the space as you're pushing forward with this, as well as some quick little tidbits of information and advice how to push forward with them. And once again, too, the last session of this will be open up for Q&A, so feel free to drop some questions in the chat there, and we'll address those at the end. But to start us off, I just want to talk about insufficient resources, potentially the number one thing that we hear. We don't have the budget, let's put that in Q3, Q4. Let's worry about that later. We don't have the time, capacity, the bandwidth. I think the best way to answer this is to look at it from small initiatives, bite-sized approaches. You don't need to completely revamp your entire product line, your supply chains, everything all at once, but more so what Brett talked about, look at the materiality areas and take it from a bite-sized approach. And in line with that, I think one thing to really create those changes on a small scale level that trickle down and have a larger effect is to utilize strategic partnerships to make that happen. There are organizations, there are companies, softwares, solutions, products that were created specifically to address some of these key problems that you're having as a business entity. And by using these partnerships, you can benefit both those organizations and those products as well as your own company. And it costs oftentimes less than it would if you were trying to do it all in-house. So that's my little bit of advice there. Second one, I'll pass along to you, Michelle.
Yeah, thanks, Ricky. So for this insight or for this pain point, we're looking at lack of buy-in or support from leadership. And my personal first thought when I read that is you have values misalignment. If your leadership is not prioritizing this. But I'd like to pull a leaf out of Brett's book in my answer to this one and say, go the data route with this. And I've done this with clients in the past, and this has been tremendously successful. What I like to do is to focus on the data sets on the younger generations. So the millennial generation and the Gen Z underneath the millennials routinely demonstrate in annual surveys that they are driven by impact. And I want to give you some metrics from the 10th annual Deloitte Global Millennial and Gen Z survey. This is a great source of data on millennials and Gen Z. And so in this survey, they found that nearly 4 in 10, so 44% of Gen Zers, 37% of millennials, say they have rejected assignments and job opportunities because they have ethical concerns about the company. So if you're leadership and you're looking at your pipeline of talent and who you're bringing in the door, those folks coming in the door, and mind you, these are the people with tech skills, they are looking to see what your policies and practices are. It matters in your recruiting. It also matters in your product as well. That same survey found that over half of Gen Zers at 55%, millennials at 54%, say they research a brand's environmental impact and policies before buying a product or accepting a job offer. So the younger generations who are starting to make up the bulk of the buying power in the market, you can't ignore them. And I think some of the older generations that have had less exposure to these efforts are actually having to adapt to the learning curve. And for this one, I would say pull out your data sets and demonstrate why this is important to the bottom line if you're seeing lack of buy-in from leadership. Ricky, I'll take the next one as well, if that sounds good to you. So folks, our third one here is poor integration into core business. And again, I got to go with you, a values misalignment here. If you're saying that this is important to your business, but you're not seeing it in your core business. And this is really the scenario that I think we see with older companies that have been founded before the onset of a lot of these initiatives. And now they're having to ex post facto bring them in. And my best recommendation here, which I also have done in the past, is this is where you need to get people in a room and you need to bring it back to your origin story. what is the origin story around the founding of the company, and what can you pull in from that origin story and the values of the company that demonstrate the alignment to these efforts, that demonstrate that these efforts actually are at the core of your business. And then from there, you strategize for how to more concretely and tactically bring them in to the business. But really, this is the moment where you need to get people in the room. You need to bring it back to the origin story. And one last piece of advice for you, a great time to do this is when you have executive turnover, because there's going to be a new breeze blowing. People are going to be interested in kind of out with the old and in with the new. And it's a great time to revisit these conversations, especially if you feel like there's misalignment.
Yeah, that executive turnover is a really interesting piece of advice, but it has incredible benefits that come with it too. So thanks for sharing that. I will pass the next couple over here to Brett.
Yeah, I'll be short and sweet to make sure we leave time for for a little bit of Q&A. But you know, not to go into too much detail again about data as the first piece, but inadequate measurement tools and being really strategic and thoughtful about either bite-sized approach, like Ricky mentioned at first, utilizing partnerships to invest in opportunities to get those metrics, to get data, to set appropriate goals and KPIs. And sometimes that will take an investment. There are opportunities to form partnerships where it's a shared savings model. So it's not always an outlay of capital with an unknown return on investment. And sometimes it's these really unique partnerships. Again, last summer I was lucky to have a partnership with Davidson College for an intern. And what I really wanted to understand about the peer-reviewed research in coffee, this is my last little story, but I had my intern spend 3 weeks going through the entire carbon footprint of our cup of coffee. So she spent 3 weeks and got a number. And I spent 3 hours on the last day that she was doing her work to also get a number using kind of extrapolated data, peer-reviewed articles, and some quick data sets. And the number that we got was almost the same. And so I don't want to show that as an example of like avoiding doing the work, but I wouldn't normally, have that intern, or maybe not everybody will in the future. And so using what you can to get as good a data and build as much, metrics going forward. And then the last piece about marketing, we talked about marketing as a ploy, not a ploy, when done right. And I'll give you all a bit of a take-home assignment is to go, if you haven't, go read a little bit about what happened in the last couple of weeks with Tractor Supply Company, talking about authenticity and values alignment, and kind of standing your ground, or as Michelle said, when shit gets tough, hold the line effectively. And you may have your own thoughts about that story, but that communication piece is key when done right, and when it's aligned well with what you believe in as an organization.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Brett. And all really good insights there. And to wrap us up with this last one here, another thing that we hear on a regular basis is the short-term focus costs too much money. So kind of similar to the insufficient resources, but leaning into the angle that we've heard sometimes that professionals want to adopt these practices, they give it a try, they put some money into it, or allow people the flexibility or autonomy to run with these things. But then we hear the ramifications. It's, hey, we spent Q1 and Q2 on this. We didn't see any benefits of it. We're pulling the budget. We're reallocating the funds to somewhere else. We're moving your position, or cutting these departments altogether. And I think the issue with this is that oftentimes leaders, they look from in a quarter to quarter basis. That's just how we operate for reporting and different returns on certain investments for businesses. And specifically like sales, for example, you put more money to sales, you're going to get more profits. It's as clean and cut as that. If there isn't this a larger issue at whole, but for sustainability and impact work, it's not that simple. It's not that short term. You are really looking at integrating different measures in the way you think about business into the fabric of your very entity. You're inspiring your consumers to think differently about how they produce purchase your products, and your own employees on how they go about their day-to-day work. This isn't a quick one-size-fits-all approach. It's going to require some creativity, but it also requires time to let it actually see the full big picture. And so once again, going back to kind of a similar trait here, you need to focus on these long-term benefits. There are countless studies out there. Michelle shared some of them, Brett shared some others, that this is beneficial. The numbers are in. It's just a matter of doing it properly And if it's done improperly, at haste or impatiently or just incorrectly with the wrong intentions in mind, you won't see the benefits that you really want to. So all in all, I hope this was really helpful. Feel free to take screenshots. You'll see the webinar recording here afterwards. But I want to get just a few minutes for some questions and answers. I see one trickled in thus far, but feel free to drop any more in the chat here. And as we kind of wrap up here with a few minutes left, I appreciate once again taking the time. But I'll throw up this slide right here and just urge you, before we dive into questions, feel free to reach out to us. You know, we are just humans just like you and I. We're here to help you on this journey. We're all, you know, going through the same challenges and journeys here together. But we also want to share with you our insights and what we've provided today, and are more than happy to continue the conversation offline with any of you. So we'll pass this along. And I see one question from Eleanor. I'll kick this out. Is it tough to get buy-in from leadership with the communication piece, especially when many leaders are from an older generation? This is a really, really good one. Michelle or Brett, either of you are interested in taking this?
I'll just start us off, because I think this question kind of teases out a little bit of what I was getting at, which is clearly the data shows the younger generations, the Gen Z and millennial, they want it and they buy it. And I don't think they're the generations that require as much influencing around the value add. Interestingly, I would say that my answer to the previous question around leadership buy-in is to show the data that indicates that this will increase the value of the company. It will have ripple effects across the company. I think the older generations are looking more for data as opposed to what the younger generations, I think, feel as a more intrinsic motive for this type of work. What would you say, Brett?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think if you're not communicating, you're falling behind. So it's kind of, you know, you got to get on the train or get out. And I know we've got just a minute or two left. So if, I'll just I see a question: Can an older company update its core values? I think so. I think it's fine, totally fine to adapt or refine or rethink. At Summit, we've been around for 25 years. Last year, we went through a process. We had a really lofty purpose statement and vision. We had a ton of values, and we sat in a room for a couple hours and we rethought, we reframed, and our mission had to do with providing opportunities for people and communities to flourish, which is still really important to us. But at the end of the day, we simplified it to, we want to create moments of joy. That's what our business is for. And we're going to do it in grand ways, but every member of our organization has the opportunity to help provide a moment of joy. And by doing that, there will be a ripple effect from a sustainability, from a social impact, from a flourishing opportunity. So I totally think updating, shifting, changing, simplifying values, mission, purpose is a great exercise to go through.
And I would just add briefly, drawing from the origin story is a great way to keep the bridge to the original genesis of the company while also moving with the times.
Yeah, I completely agree. And maybe one kind of final takeaway message as we wrap up here is, Brett, you hit it, but simplify. You know, core messages, what are you really trying to get across here? Your purpose is directly tied with your business and your overall direction, but don't make it overwhelming or too complicated. You know, really hone in on what's important to you in your business, what your shareholders, what your stakeholders are interested in, and pursue that. So with that, I know we have just probably 20 seconds here. I see Jeremy's joined us. Big thank you to both Michelle, Brett, and all of you that joined us today. And Jeremy, I'll pass it over to you to wrap us up here.